That one has to go off. This is what you call phone difficulties, Bob. This is how people know it's live radio.
That's the only way that we could know that, huh?
Now, the number of mistakes I've been making today, I think people are pretty sure this isn't a prepared thing. So if you'd like to call and talk to Bob and ask him your questions, you may do that at 479-1160. Meanwhile, he's here, and he's with us now. Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh,
I wasn't sure whether I was going to make connection with you or not.
Gracious sakes. It's been a chore all week long, Bob. It really has. All right, so what are we talking about today? This time of the year, I was sort of previewing your visit, and I said a lot of people moved their plants indoors when the cold weather came, and maybe after a month indoors, they're not looking as healthy as they would like them to do. What are some of the basics we need to know about those plants that were thriving outside, but when the weather turned colder, we brought them in, and now they're not looking so good?
Right, it's amazing. You know, we can have plants in all winter and then put them out in the summertime, and they look so vibrant, and we bring them in, and within a few weeks they can look a little different than they looked when they were outdoors.
Yeah.
And we may have left them outdoors a little longer than we should have. There might have been a couple nights there where it got cooler than we thought, or we forgot about those plants out there for a little while, and then we remembered, I got to bring those in. So plants can be affected by that.
Yeah.
Just a couple cold nights can do it. And then you bring them in at the time they look okay, but then we get a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks later, and leaves might be drooping a little bit, or they might not be looking quite right. And it could just be some shock from the cold temperatures, and then hopefully they'll recover from that. We just need to provide as much light. The light levels indoors are so much less in most cases than we realize, versus being outside. Even on a cloudy day outside, there's more light than indoors.
Yeah.
So that whole light factor is really important. And then with the days getting shorter on top of that, that limits the amount of light that the plant gets. And the plant has to have that light to make its own food. So that's that whole photosynthesis process, that big long word, where plants are able to manufacture their own food. And they need light to do that. And so those light levels can greatly influence the health and the longevity of a plant.
Yeah. You have talked about humidity in the past as well.
Yes. Yes. And normally indoors, it's a much drier environment where we might be running dehumidifiers, which sucks, moisture out of the air. And then with a lot of our heating systems, forced hot air systems, those tend to make a drier environment inside. So that lowers that humidity around the plant, and essentially that plant has to work harder to replace the moisture that it's losing through its breathing oxygen pores that are there. We can't really see those little openings in the leaves, but they're there, and they exchange oxygen as well as moisture. And so that can happen at a greater rate when the air is drier. So some people have humidifiers on their furnaces, which helps regulate that and makes the environment, in most cases, nicer for us as well.
Yeah.
So we need to just think about that, and if it is a drier environment, or if you have a wood burner, you can create some great warmth there, but you can also dry out the air a lot as well.
So an open pot of water on top of that wood burner might help too, huh?
That could, Yep, that helps evaporate some moisture into the air and can help with that. And
Plus,
then, of
if
course,
you need
we
a cup
talked
of
about
tea.
putting. What's that?
I said, plus if you need a cup of tea.
Yes, you're ready to roll almost.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't have interrupted you.
No, that's okay.
You were on a roll.
That little bit of humor in there, it works very well. And practicality. No sense in putting it on the stove when you can warm it up on the wood burner.
There you go. That's a good plan. A good plan. Okay, so those are some of the things. When we notice that, particularly, I'm thinking of the tropical leaf type of things that we enjoy so much in the summertime, and we bring them indoors. Those leaves, the tips of the leaves start to turn yellow and then black, and then the leaves look really, really unhealthy. When the tips of those leaves start to turn, should we break that off of there or trim that off of there and just leave the green healthy part?
Yes, you can do that because the tissue's dead. So it was either the lack of light, the lack of humidity, the combination of that. And then, of course, we can have soil that's too wet. It's harder to do that with our potting soil that we usually have for those types of plants, but we can still overdo it, especially if we have a saucer underneath and we water, and then that water collects in the bottom, which we want a little bit of water to do that, to flow through that container.
Mm-hmm.
But if it sits full of water constantly, then that soil's saturated. There's no place for that water to go, and we can actually create problems with the foliage because the soil's too wet and the roots they actually start to starve from oxygen because there needs to be that oxygen in the soil also. And when we flood the soil, all those pore spaces between those soil particles gets replaced by liquid instead of a mixture of liquid and oxygen.
So it just compacts it down.
Yeah. So anyhow, though you can get that foliage dying back, and so anything that's dead, we can trim that off. Sometimes it makes the leaves look ragged, but you can usually take the scissors and make a new point out of it, just to tidy it up a little bit.
Oh yeah, if you're that's something I hadn't thought of. You actually break off the bad part, and you can actually take your scissors and do a little work of art there and turn it into something without causing damage.
Yeah, make it look like it's the tip of the leaf when it really isn't.
Okay.
And you can still get...
You can do some origami on that and have some fun.
Yeah.
Okay, just saying. That should be
fun. Give that a shot.
Okay. All right, so some of the other things that we think about when we are moving plants indoors or when we're actually starting plants indoors, it's a little bit early to think about that right now, but, people are looking...
depending on, there's some herbs and things that you may want to start, lettuces, some of those shorter day crops that you could be starting all along the way during the winter if you want to have a little supply of that, which is a little different than, of course, house plants and things, but you could also start those as well.
I was going to ask you about that, people, they grow, lettuce is a very easy crop to grow. And if the conditions are right indoors, can you grow yourself a crop of lettuce and keep that going through the winter?
You sure can. In fact, and on a much larger scale, that is starting to happen more and more around the country and world, growing these crops indoors. And part of that's related to the food safety factor. All we have to do is think about romaine lettuce is probably the most common lettuce that we run into issues with from a health standpoint. And a lot of those are grown in big, huge fields. But some people are taking that and moving it indoors and just growing them under lights in huge facilities. And it might be a greenhouse, but it might also be a structure that uses artificial lights to grow the crop. So that's, some people call that vertical farming. You could call it indoor farming, but that is a trend that's happening in the produce industry on a large scale.
Do they grow them in like those plastic window boxes or in big pots, or how do you start something like that?
Well,
it doesn't have to be deep.
No, you don't need a huge container to do that. A lot of times it's done lettuce, hydroponic lettuce.
Yeah, they don't even use dirt.
A very good way to do that.
Yeah.
And then you just have a shallow container that might only be an inch or inch and a half deep.
Yeah.
And usually it's wider than that, but because that root system it'll get it's amazing how big the root system will get just hanging and having a little bit of water flowing through there.
Yeah. Hey, we do have a caller on the line.
Crop.
A caller's just come through for us, and we're nearing the end of the segment, so we want to get this question on. Good morning.
Okay.
Hey, Dr. Bob. Can you talk a little bit about fall fertilizing, particularly with perennials, and what's the best type to utilize to do that?
Okay.
Get off.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Fall fertilizing.
Usually with flowering plants and most of the perennials, we're taking advantage of the flowering that they do. So a fertilizer that's higher in phosphorus. So there's a lot of them that have twice as much phosphorus as nitrogen and potassium. So a 15-30-15 would be an example of that. A lot of the liquid type fertilizers that we mix up with water and then utilize for flowering plants are structured that way that they're a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio, or 15-30-15 again is an example of that. Those products work well with any of the flowering perennials and things.
Okay. All right. And
at this time, things are going dormant. I mean, I would only apply. Oftentimes, we can put phosphorus and potassium down this time of year and work it in if needed, and not so much the nitrogen, because most of these plants have gone dormant, and so they're not going to be utilizing that. So there's a chance we can lose that nitrogen over the winter months. So it's all better to wait till spring to put a little on and then work that in to the soil.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the timing of using fertilizer, and obviously you just started to answer that. I'm sure you've got resources available too that people can learn more about when and what to use as fall fertilizers.
Yes, and those plants don't need a lot. Kind of tailor it to the plants that you're growing. If they're more aggressive plants, bigger plants that may need more fertilization, then we can adapt that. And there's a lot of plants that they don't like very much. They'll do better when things are minimal versus having it maximized.
Okay, very good. Well, this was quite the segment today. We stumbled all over each other pretty much all through the thing.
Hey, but we made it.
We made it. We survived it. Thank you, Robert.
You're welcome.
Have a great weekend.
The opportunity, you too.
It is.
Opportunity, you too.
It is.
Opportunity.